Welcome to our daily Forex market analysis call, and this is in preparation for trading on October 3rd, 2018. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This is for educational purposes only. Trading is a risky business, so please be careful with your money. We will start off as usual by taking a look at our calendar here. So today, not a ton of data. We did have RBA statement, but nothing's really changed. The cash rate is the same there. And we did have Fed Chair Powell speaking today as well, but basically he just said what we have already heard from FOMC, that the economy is doing well, the U.S. economy can accommodate another interest rate hike this year, and then a couple more next year as well. So overall, nothing was different based on that. Coming up tomorrow, we have a ton of PMI data. So we have services, we have a lot of Eurozone PMI data, and then we have services PMI data from the UK here. And services PMI data is important for UK because it is a service-based economy. And PMI numbers are basically leading numbers for retail sales. So if PMI numbers come out well, that means the retail sales will be good as well. And then in the US session, we have ADP non-farm employment change numbers. Again, these come prior to our numbers, non-farm payroll numbers on Friday. And then we also have final services PMI, and then ISM non-manufacturing PMI numbers for the US as well. And then we have 3 FOMC members speaking. So overall here, these numbers can be interesting because again, non-farm payroll numbers are very important. So ADP numbers are sort of they give us a bit of a gauge of where the non-farm payroll numbers may fall. They're not always, exactly the same, but they can give us an indication of what the economy is doing. So that's why these are important. So let's go on to the charts here. And of course, during all that, we also have to keep an eye on Italy. Italy is going ahead with their budget numbers. There is situation currently going on in Italy here. So there was pressure on Italy from Eurozone partners that they need to modify their budget. They are not listening essentially to the Eurozone. Eurozone is, or members are concerned that we may have similar situation to Greece in here as well, because they're Italy is the second most indebted nation. So the debt level is really high. And we saw what happened with Greece when the debt levels became too high and they were not able to service their debt. So that is a concern. But in spite of that, Italy is not listening to the EU officials, and they are continuing on with their budgets. And of course, the concern here is the sell-off in Rome's financial markets, because if the financial markets start selling off, then it can have a lot of repercussions from that. So we'll have to keep an eye on the situations. If the situation deteriorates, that could be problematic as well. So going back to the euro here, looking at the daily candle close yesterday, we were looking for a drop. So it went right into the target here. Now, based on what we have here, bias is still to the downside, but we do have a pin in the bottom. So that will be the concern. So this looks kind of like this here. So we have overall bias to the downside, but we have a large pin just like this one here. And what that means is that the bias will still stay to the downside, but we have to be cautious, and price may not break down. So it may not be able to go much lower. It may just do a retest and then go up from there and bounce off of that. Or it could just push higher like this and then drop from there. So basically bias is still to the downside, but I'd be careful that price could start going higher if it surpasses kind of this limit, this level here, 1.1580, chances are it will go all the way into 1625 here. So that's what I'm looking at. So overall, we had a drop, pullback. I would be looking for a drop to retest the low again, but we have to be cautious with euro dollar. Pound dollar here, the bias yesterday was to the downside. We did get this drop, and now bias is still to the downside. But again, we are starting to see these pins, and we'll talk about dollar index in a bit. Dollar index is sort of turning as well. So that's something we have to be mindful of because it will have an impact on all the US dollar crosses. So with the pound here, again, the bias is to the downside. I will look for a push up into 130 and then potentially a drop lower. And first target would be the low of today, which is 1.2940. Second target would be 1.2880 to the downside. And if you take a look at the 1 hour, we see that price kind of stayed low here and then dropped. And this is where we are. It has pulled back since this morning, so it's just sideways here. Now, if it stays below the pivot point here, looking for price to drop once again to go test the low. So 1.2940, which is this low, will be the first target. 1.2880 will be the second target. Now we have Aussie. Aussie here, yesterday we had talked about a drop in Aussie, so we got that. So we have a bearish candle close. So the bias for this one is again to the downside here. So I'd look for a pullback potentially into 0.7200 and then a drop. The target is 0.7150-ish level here. So looking for price to drop further in Aussie dollar. So bearish bias for this one here. And if you take a look at the 1 hour here, it could pull back higher, and I will look for some sort of a reaction at the 7,200 level and then a further drop. Overall bias is to the downside. New Zealand dollar here, similar thing. We have a drop. We were looking for a drop. Now, the commodity currencies have overall been relatively strong, and but the bias here is still to the downside. So I will look for price to go lower, but we have to be careful because dollar CAD has been, or Canadian dollar has been very strong, and that tends to impact when oil has been strong. So that tends to impact the other commodity currencies as well. Overall, though, bias is to the downside. 65.40, which is the bottom here, will be the target to the downside for New Zealand dollar. Dollar CAD here, this one, so we saw this big drop and now we have seen a pullback, and it seems to be holding below 1.2840 level here. And as it continues to hold this level, the bias is still to the downside. Unless it breaches this resistance at 1.2840, then it can go fill this gap in. And it could go even further all the way up into 1.2920-ish level here. But for now, as long as it stays below 1.2840, the bias is still to the downside. Next target would be 1.2750 level to the downside. Euro pound here, we actually had a bullish candle close for euro pound, but we do have pin on the top. Now, we are into support, or we were into support here, which we talked about yesterday. So with this one, it could go either way because overall bias is to the downside. We do have a bullish candle close, which means this could pull up higher. And it could go into a 1.8940 level, but it could get stuck right into these pins at 89.20 level and then turn from there as well. So bias will be bullish, but I would be concerned about, or I would be careful with the resistance at 0.8920, because if it stays lower, it's likely to go below further down. Euro